Hello and welcome. This is Gert from SEOleverage.com, and today I'm very pleased to have a guest back. We already had on the show Anfernee Chansamooth. Thank you so much for coming.
Glad to be back, man. I've been hiding in lockdown, but this is an opportunity for me to come back into the public eye. Thanks, Gert.
Awesome. We take every opportunity we get to have you on the show. We had a very interesting discussion back in episode 8. You were one of our first guests, I think, on this show and on SEO Leverage. And I really appreciate it. We talked a lot about, I think, what you kind of breathe and live, which is content and content strategy. Where I had the pleasure to meet you in person in 2020 before the Corona madness hit. And I could really quickly tell that content is something you really know a lot about. You have a lot of experience. You have been working with a lot of companies here. We also leveraged this a little bit here and got you to help us with a case study we're going to publish soon on our own site. And it's really interesting when you have a professional kind of put things and data into words and make this understandable. So I can definitely give you a shout out there. Today, I want to talk a little bit about how writing has changed over time, how the process of writing is changing actually. But I want to start where many of our clients have been starting maybe even a few years back, which is essentially their blog writing, updating their blog, adding new posts, etc., writing informative content pieces. Does a traditional writing approach really look like when you view it, when someone maintains a blog, and what are the issues that might come up there?
So, if we go back to, I guess, the time when I started really writing for B2B, we're going about 7 years ago now. At that time, the biggest challenges or struggles that businesses were having, or business owners or marketers within the business, what they were facing was consistency in producing quality output. So there were two things on their minds. One was having consistent content that you can publish, that is, reader worthy, whatever that means, but also that speaks to SEO, that's going to rank well, in Google, Yahoo, whatever the search engines are, and then there's finding that intersection between having enough content to be published, and then having it be meeting SEO standards. And also I'll add one more, which is to have it written in a way that is compelling to humans, right? So there is a difference, and I know you know this very well, Gert, between reading something that is highly technical in nature, like if I'm reading an SEO report, versus, or an accounting white paper, versus having something that the general public can read and consume and understand a concept that may be considered technical. All right, so I might not be the best person at explaining profit and loss and zero and all the things that come with using tools like that, but in terms of, I won't have the accounting background because I'm not a trained accountant, I'm not a CPA, but what I am able to do, and people like me can do, is then translate what's in the expert's mind. So we work with practitioners like yourself, and we then extract the information that you know and all the expertise that you bring to your clients, and then convert that into copy or content that is accessible. Okay, and then also a key point to note here that's going to come up into our conversation later is carry the tone of voice of the brand, right? Because the biggest challenge that businesses were having, or that I was talking to, was, and the biggest concern was, if we outsource our content to you or to a copywriter or an article writer or whoever it might be, how do we make sure that the quality of work meets our voice, right? How do we make sure that expressions and phrases and things like that, when someone else is reading it, they go, oh yeah, that's SEO leverage, or that's Bean Ninjas, that's super fast business, right? And it's not just generic content that's out there. Okay,
Right.
so there were a few of the key challenges. Now, in terms of the process, I remember when I first started working with one of my clients, I asked her, how long does it normally take you to write? This was even the days before it was long form. 3,000 words was an expectation. This was when it was 500 words was an expectation,
Right.
right? And she would say it takes me 3 hours to come up with just the first draft, and then I have to go back maybe the next day and I edit for an hour, and then this is just writing in a Word doc or a Google doc before I put it into WordPress, and then I got to do the formatting and add images and SEO optimization and all those sort of things, and that takes me another couple of hours. So we're already talking about 8 hours to 10 hours for one article, all right? And that's 500 2,000 words. Right now, where it's at, and what tools like Surfer SEO are telling us is 3,000 is an average, piece, if you're trying to rank on Google, and it fluctuates based on industry, of course. But I did a poll recently on LinkedIn to my community, and asked what's on average, how long does it take you to write, a 1,000-word article? And most people, and this is the draft, not to get to the final. This is the draft, and most people responded 3 hours, right? And so when you're a busy entrepreneur and you're trying to do the whole sales thing and network and build a team and manage the team and get the vision right and get all those things happening, and then tax time's coming up real soon for those in Australia. So all those things, your priority is not always sitting there writing content.
Absolutely. I think you made a lot of good points and that already match my experience from the past years of SEO. It's been a while since we have been doing this. Definitely consistency is a really important thing. In the past, especially, people thought it was really the frequency, so they kind of felt pushed to put something out every week, and there was a lot of stress involved. I once had a blog in Spanish, I remember, where I tried to push out an article every day. So I would spend at least half a day, and I had quite some training putting this together. I didn't have to do too much research, but it took me still at least half a day to push a daily article out. We don't talk about frequency so much anymore. We talk about having quality content, maintain it, refresh it these days, but the consistency, and definitely make sure this is quality content, not just sharing a thought and we don't care about what happens to this article, but really quality content. Definitely our experience also matches that it definitely takes a day or two to put out a quality piece of content. And once you outsource this, you want to make really sure that those people understand what you think is your brand voice. What are the main key points you want to put out there? We just had a client point out that they have a very strong standing on one aspect of their industry. So if you don't know this, if you outsource this to someone who doesn't have this background, it's definitely really, really difficult to do. And then I also think very often it's better to outsource still the content creation, because other people, outsiders, are better able to phrase it in a non-technical way, as you're saying. So very often when we work with copywriters like you, like other copywriters, we get like a very different way of explaining what we actually do, which is interesting and also helps the sales process a little bit to say, okay, you can put it with this metaphor, you can put it that way. And then the length of the articles, we know that it depends really on the specific search queries, but articles, quality articles, tend to be longer, especially when you target larger search volumes that actually drive a lot of traffic. We also see that articles can't be 500 word summaries anymore. You definitely go in a few thousand, 2,000, 3,000, but you want to narrow it down on the specific keyword and say, okay, what does Google really expect? The tools give you an average, but there might be a 5,000 article ranking in a 1,000 article that might be more in your league. So you want to really check this out. We're now in a place where we are more and more exposed to artificial intelligence. So not only in content writing, and we're definitely going to zoom in there, but in our daily lives, a lot of things we don't even notice are really based or supported by artificial intelligence. We're an SEO agency, so you don't have to go beyond Google. Google is using AI all the time and has been for quite a few years, and they have been very conscious about how AI might be changing the entire landscape. We see Google focusing a lot on EAT, expertise, authoritativeness, trustworthiness, making sure that this piece of content was put together or at least informed by someone who really knows what they're doing, especially in medical spaces, financial spaces, the your money, your life spaces, etc. But now we also have AI that has been in the past, as you suggested, before we hit record here, really something only the big guys could play around, paying thousands of dollars every month in order to start using those tools. We're now in a phase where we have multiple tools on the market, affordable for small businesses, that can bring us to quite an interesting stage. So I want to say here at this point, I think there is a difference between machine learning and artificial intelligence. So machine learning is really automating processes that could technically be done manually, but maybe based on the amount of data, it's really not possible anymore. So like every client of ours has tools from us at their disposal where they can create content based on machine learning analysis, etc. But then we have artificial intelligence, which takes it really one step back, one step further, one step further, and really adds a huge amount of information to this and a huge amount of customization. I know you've been doing a lot of webinars, a lot of seminars, a lot of work with AI testing tools, but I want to put you on the spot a little bit. You're really a content writer. So if someone asks me for a content writer, Anfernee Chansamooth is the first name that comes to my mind. How do you cope with this situation between being a professional copywriter and having AI tools slowly starting to create content?
That's a great question, Gert. And I want to, like, what comes to mind is a post I put into a group online. This is maybe 2 or 3 years ago. I remember this conversation started to happen, which was AI is coming into the market for, and is there the risk of us losing our jobs, right? You talked about some of before I answer that question, you talked about some of the applications that AI is being used in our daily lives. And some people might not be aware of this, but banking and finance, healthcare, retail, telecom, education, travel, right? We have already been using AI tools, and we just might not have been aware that that's the case, right? So it's just no surprise then that it's coming into the world of content or marketing and sales, and that in small business, right? So for me, when I'm looking at, okay, I'm really someone who looks at trends that are happening in the world and with technology. And one question I had on my mind was, how long, and this is the question, the big question was, how long would it take before AI replaced my job? Right? And then what do I need to do now? And this is 3 years ago when I had this question. What do I need to do now to prepare for that and make sure that I'm not redundant, right? And so I already being involved in copywriting communities and content communities and B2B communities. I had already seen that copywriters started to transition, like the higher profile copywriters, the ones that I had been mentored by and learned from. They had already started to incorporate new skills. So some of them were becoming UX designers, learning how to understand user experience, right, and how to advise. So it's not just, no longer is it, yes, I will write your landing page, the copy for your landing page, but I'm going to also give you consultation on how you should structure the landing page for the highest conversion, right? So that's happening. You're seeing the merger of what was a traditional conversion rate a specialist with the writer and the designer. Those three roles now are merging. So you have people who actually have skills in all those areas. Then you have what I've started to become is more of a hybrid copywriter and content strategist and basic SEO strategist. So I have some like basic SEO knowledge, and I would still always say, if you want the expert, talk to Gert and SEO leverage. But I can give you some sense of where I think we should be focusing the content on, and then we'll put you over to Gert and he will validate, right? And that's the way we work nicely, in terms of collaboration, right? So where I'm seeing right now, 2021, let's time date it, July 2021, what I'm seeing is that the AI technology right now is at a place where small businesses, agencies, companies like mine and yours can afford to actually access these tools at an affordable rate, right? Like we couldn't do that 5 years ago, right? When IBM first came out with what's called Deep, the one that won the chess game against the world chess champion.
Deep Blue, or was it Deep Blue?
Deep Blue, yeah, like that's super expensive. IBM owns that IP. We can't get there, but we can get something like a Jarvis AI, or we can get a Copy AI, or a Surfer SEO, or these kind of tools, and we can now see the quality. When I remember the first tool I ever played was maybe 3 years ago. There were a couple of websites that already had AI copywriting tools. you put in a keyword, it would spit out 500 words or 250 words, and it was garbage. Like you couldn't read it, it didn't make any sense, it didn't have any context. Now you go and get a free trial of Jarvis, you play with it for a week, the first keyword or phrase you put in there, you hit generate whatever the content is, you have to guide it, and then it's giving us high quality, like the quality you would not know that a human did not write that, right? And that's where the technology is today.
Absolutely. I think this is really interesting. So on the one hand, we have writers starting to pivot into new areas to cover more ground. It's not writing itself. It's not writing itself anymore. If you take a good copy and you mess up the layout, the landing page, or have leakage, etc., conversion leakage, it's not going to work anyway. So I think this makes a lot of sense. And then you made an excellent point with those tools, and we are playing with them. We have been playing with them for years. Whenever something new comes out, I really like to play with these tools myself. I then hand this over to the writers, to the SEO team, and say, make sure everybody knows how to use this and knows what the status is, because I don't think that in a couple of years we're going to write a first draft, probably even earlier. We're going to write a first draft ourselves, at least not with a junior writer. If this is a high profile article, etc., the first draft or outline might come from informed by a senior. But I think we head into a role where AI is going to create this first draft in a matter of seconds. We always do sample tasks. When we hire a new writer, I ask them for a sample task, like 200 words introduction for some topic, 400 words or something like this, to take a little bit of their research skills, if this is a topic they don't know about, and how they phrase things, etc. I have to say that at this stage, and I think it's important to time this, 2021, July, I have seen worse sample tasks from writers with 2 years experience than conversion AI, for example, can put together if it's informed correctly. So this means that the first draft the junior could put together, the first outline, etc., very often can be informed by AI. So this is not necessarily maybe a tendency we might find good. I talked to an SEO the other day, and he said we're dumping down the internet because essentially we have the machines decide what is being talked about, because the first draft is ultimately what this article is probably going to be about, depending on how much you inform it. So they were saying we're dumbing down the internet, and the machines are going to decide what we all read and what we all know. And you obviously can have your different visions about this. I think you're right. AI is coming. We have been using machine learning and AI in SEO for a couple of years already very intensely, and are testing every advances to see if there is any leverage we can have for clients, because ultimately Google is using AI. We can't use a human only approach trying to beat an AI. It's just not going to happen in many, many cases. But then again, from our experience right now, it's still at a stage where when my writers test this, they say, look, I can put this draft together and then edit it, or I can write it myself, and it's going to take the same time. What's your experience here?
Yeah, so there are a couple of points that you raised there around the tools can work nicely as a junior or an assistant, and that's the way I like to view it, as an assistant writer. So it's a lot of time in the writing process is spent on just getting the ideas out of your head and then structuring them in a way that it flows, right? And so brainstorming. So if you've ever heard of the phrase writer's block, right? What that is I don't know the structure, or I don't know the layout, and I don't know which direction I want to take the reader, right? And so I get stuck, and you can get overwhelmed, because if we use writing content for a service like SEO, you literally have thousands of different trees that you can go down, you can take a reader through, and if you as the writer is getting overwhelmed, guess what? Your audience is going to get overwhelmed very quickly. And so it can help brainstorm. So I'll give you some examples of how I've been able to apply the technology. So I was able to, and this is in the first 2 weeks of me playing with the tool, I drafted a 3,000 word article in under 2 hours, and in a topic that I have no expertise in. Right, okay. So this is intermittent fasting. Okay, I'm not a health specialist. I don't like. I read a lot, and I've done the fast, of course. As an experimenter. But I couldn't tell you from the difference from a bar of soap. But usually it would take me 1 to 2 hours just to do an outline. and then 4 to 6 hours to write the article, right? And that's researching, that's finding credible sources to connect to the pieces. If you're writing health related things or technical things, you want to have credible resources. Okay, so 3,000 words in 2 hours, right? Recently, I was able to do 1,000 words in 30 minutes for an article. I've also taken an article that was published on my site, which was already ranking well, and went from 1,200 words when I originally wrote the piece 3 years ago, and then upgraded that. You talked about now it's more about using content you've already published and then improving it. So I took your recommendation, the SEO keyword you gave me, and then I went into that and then turned it into a 3,966 word article in 3 hours, right? Where in the past that would have taken me 6 to 8 hours to do that, right? And this is someone who's been writing for over 10 years, okay? And LinkedIn profile summary, I wrote that in 10 minutes, my latest version of the summary, instead of 30 minutes, right? I also published a LinkedIn article, post in under 15 minutes, which normally would take me 30 minutes to an hour. Okay, so this is just some of the application of the technology. Now, the thing I want to note here is, let's be clear what it can't do, what AI cannot do. Okay, because there's a common myth out there that if you buy the tool or you subscribe to it and start using it, that you can forget about hiring the editor, forget about hiring the copywriter. You don't need them anymore.
Right.
You can save. You don't need to pay them the $800 to write them the one article when you can pay $150 or whatever for the tool and you're done. Time and time again, I'm in the communities, and so I see this, and people make an update and they say, I want a refund. This tool is terrible. It doesn't work. And the response always, my response, and also the response of the tool, the creators of the tool, and the other members in the community, is because your expectation isn't matching the reality. Like, it is not replacing your writer. Okay. You still need to edit. You still need to guide it and train the tool. You still need to help it understand tone of voice. And when I say help it, it's like I'm speaking as if it's a human being. It will never fully understand and comprehend you as a human being and the way you feel about things and the way you express things, right? What it's doing is it's doing pattern recognition. So you feed it, words and phrases, and you repeatedly do that, and you adjust and you edit, and over time it starts to then mimic what you're feeding it, right? It's like to use a human analogy, training a baby how to speak, right? You keep giving it phrases over time and time, and then eventually the child will learn how to mimic that. And when it's learning in initial stages, it doesn't have understanding or comprehension of what it's saying, right? The child is just repeating what you're saying, daddy, 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 daddy. Has no idea what daddy is, right? Until there's a stage of comprehension. But that's the main thing that I want to highlight in this conversation, is that we are far from the tool completely replacing the writers in your team, right? You will still need to have a human drive it.
Absolutely. I want to really give a shout out to the 5 writers we have on the team right now as well. You guys are not going to be replaced. But I think it's really interesting here also to mention how AI really needs context. And I mention this to clients all the time when we try to make Google understand a page and an article on a website to get it ranked. Very often the reason why someone doesn't rank is because we don't give it context. So AI with a simple text can't really do too much, right? So you give it a text or you ask it to do something, it's going to be terrible unless you really give it context. So what tools out there, and I then want you to talk a little bit about maybe one of your favorite tools and give us an idea. But what I see tools do is that first of all, they ask you what you want to achieve. So what is this text you want the AI to create going to be about? Is this a meta title or a meta description? Is this a long form article? Is this a LinkedIn intro? Is this an ad? Is this something? So they already start somewhere, right? And you obviously need to have someone who knows how to configure the tool initially already to make sure they go down the right path in the first place. And then the tool is going to ask you something like maybe describe your product or describe your service or describe what you do. So they already want to extract words. We played around with this as well. So maybe we just put in all the words we know that need to be in this article. just to give this tool context. So if the tool knows this is going to be a blog intro, so not the entire article, but the intro in SEO is really important. So this is a blog intro. This is going to be about all these topics, etc. The AI has then a much better chance to produce something that actually makes sense. Or what we sometimes might use it for is to get inspiration for titles simply, right? Where you say, okay, I really don't know what the best title is. The title is going to decide if people are going to read this article. So have the AI generate 35 titles for you and just go through them, and you might find 5 that you really like, tweak them, and then put them in. So talk about writer's blocks, right? Really, very often the headline is really the toughest thing to do after writing a 3,000 words piece. I think what sums it up really well was when you said AI is an assistant. AI is not replacing writers. AI probably, if it takes less time to do things, can make writers more efficient, have a larger output, or maybe go past writer's blocks or difficult moments, etc. But definitely isn't going to substitute an really experienced writer. You can talk about writers without any experience. Maybe the first draft sometimes can really be created by an AI, and then this is going to be something a senior writer can then work through. You have been doing a lot of testing with tools. Could you name a few tools and maybe explain the one you think is most advanced a little bit more in detail, how the different steps work if you want to create an article?
Yeah, so when I was testing different tools, particularly for content writing, and then on your recommendation, I tested Surf SEO, but I'll let you speak on how you use it as an SEO and from that perspective. For me, for writing, I work with, I've tried copy.ai when I first launched. They were kind of leading the pack at the beginning, and then Conversion AI, which is now being rebranded as Jarvis AI, they've come into the market, and that's become my favorite tool. Like, I've been using it for the last 3 to 4 months, and really incorporated that within my workflow for producing, speeding up the rate at which we produce content for our clients. And what that means is then, I've been able to go back to my clients and say, well, if you want double the quantity, we can now produce it for you within the same amount of time. Right, so no longer, used to take us 10 business days to do one article. We can potentially do 2 for you if that's what you need. Right, just depends on what they need after they speak with someone like you, and you go, okay, well, this is what you need for your content, plan and your strategy. And if you haven't listened to the content strategy episode, go listen to that, because
absolutely, episode 8.
You got to start there. So, and then, I want to just so. That's the one that I recommend. Another one that I recommend, which is part of the mix for me, is Grammarly Pro, right? And for me, that really takes on the role of the editor, or it doesn't replace a human editor, but what it does, it helps with grammar. Okay, and that's really understanding. So once you published your draft, and you want now to, before you go to publishing on WordPress or wherever you want to put it, you need to make sure you have a grammar check, and usually you have an editor who does a spelling and grammar check as a pass through, and so I found that Grammarly Pro has really helped speed that process up, right? Because it using the intelligence recommends like specific phrases, and gives you different angles on how you've said something, because maybe the way you've said it, or the way that the AI, the copy tool has written it, it's not the best way of expressing it. And so what Grammarly does, it looks at that and goes, how about you say it in this way, and it gives you a recommendation, and you either approve or you reject it. But I found that super valuable, and I always run articles through that before it goes to the client. And then I think they're of those two, and then of course we're now starting to implement Surfer as a starting point for SEO, and as a check, just to validate. And I love it when we're working with the same, we're sharing a client, and then you just send over their Surfer SEO link, and I just click through and go, okay, that's you've already done the research there, and we use that again as a guide. It doesn't solve this is the difference, right? With Surf SEO, it doesn't write the content for you. It gives you how to optimize for SEO, but you still need another tool or a writer to do the writing.
Right. I think Surfer SEO definitely was the first tool that finally got us off from manually checking top ranking websites, extracting what they have in common, what kind of things they talk about. I did this years ago. I did this manually, even with handwritten notes, where I just went through the top 20 sites and extracted handwritten notes and said, what do these sites have in common? What can I have on my clients' page do very similar? What do they talk about? What should we talk about, etc. And then I think Surfer SEO wasn't the first tool to do this, but it's the first tool to do this in a very user-friendly way. We now have also InLinks doing this. It just won a prize. It's one of the best SEO tools, and they also created an editor and make it really nice. They have a little bit of a more technical level, so I think it is important to really know which tool you use at which stage of this process. We also use Grammarly and have been for a while, because it also gives you an idea of whether this copy the AI created for you is really plagiarized from some other site, or might do a quick cross check. If you have an AI, you completely trust an AI to put together a 3,000 words draft. You really don't know how much is really original, so you probably want to use Grammarly or Copyscape or whatever tool out there to also double check and triple check if this is really original content. If you don't trust it too much, then on SEO, really, I think Surfer SEO, not sure, they are collaborating with the tool, not sure if it's Jarvis or another one, but they work on a way to have this embedded. So you can even have within their editor a first AI generated draft that incorporates the terminology you might want to talk about. On our end, we rather use AI to inform the writing process, then might paste this into Surfer SEO, see are we missing something, or in links, are we missing any part of the knowledge graph of the main entities they should be talking about, etc. Depends on how technical you can get. But I think these tools are definitely on a level where small business with a writer and 2, 3 really good tools and some training can get to a very decent amount, decent quality. And when we compare a blog post, people are now able to put together with what they did before they started using those tools. And I see this on many of our clients who had a very traditional approach. And we say, look, check out these 2 tools. You're going to thank me later. We can certainly see a complete increase in quality. And this doesn't mean they wouldn't know what they were talking about before, but they think about it very differently. So they think about an introduction, they think about specific parts, their process essentially changed, because now it's not only AI informed, but also reader informed. We use this tool, Hemingway app, for example, which is a free tool. I personally use it every time I write an email, because I have a tendency to make long sentences. Sorry about this, because I also do this when speaking. But I had my mentor point out when I had a posting on LinkedIn, he just wrote me an email and said, dude, nobody's going to read this, right? Because it's just too complex. So now I have this Hemingway app helping me all the time put this together. I'm by far not a copywriter, not even experienced, or I like to write and write my posts, etc. But really, we can see tools just help us guide what we do in a very informative way, and we can really see where this is going. I want to, before we wrap this up, ask you for an example of, you mentioned Jarvis AI. What does it take? What are the different steps? If you had to put together a 1,500 words article, what would kind of be the different steps on Jarvis AI you would take?
Yep. So I will share a video with you that I put on YouTube, which actually walks through the entire process. But I'll break down the workflow here for you. So the way the workflow is designed, it takes into account a few key points, right? So we talked about the AI doesn't know context, so you as the writer have to give it context as you're producing the content with the tool. It doesn't do. It can do creative storytelling because it's pulling from a database. Basically, the creators are using GPT-3, which is a technology, and they say they have essentially loaded or downloaded 80% of the internet up to 2017, I think. So if you want, like, the issue I see with if you wanted to quote statistics from the last 3 years, the tool won't find it because it's not in its database yet. Right. So it doesn't do research. Okay. So if you want to embed research in your articles, and you should, okay, if you produce your own research and you put out white papers in your industry and you do that sort of stuff, the tool will not find it, and the tool cannot link to it. It can't do any of that stuff. So you want to have that in part of your process. Is so let's start. You start with an outline, a title. Okay, so you talked about how it can help you generate 30 titles within a second, right? Like 5 seconds. That's where we start off with. We go, okay, we have an idea or a sense of what we're going to write about. We use the keywords, that our SEO specialist has given us, or we found in Surfer, whatever way you want to do it, or Ahrefs, and then you generate your titles. From there, you then generate the intro paragraph, and then you can do that, right? You tell the tool, hey, I want an intro paragraph now, and it will spit out a paragraph for you, and it spits out variations of the paragraph, so you can choose the one that you resonate with most. You can then go from that, and then I like to use within Jarvis. There's the nice thing about Jarvis and why I prefer it over other tools is because they've loaded it with something like 30 templates that you can copywriting templates, and they've taken some of the best copywriting frameworks that have been utilized by copywriters for decades, right? Like they've gone, okay, if you've ever heard of PASS, which is problem, agitate, solution, or you've heard of AIDA, right? Attention, interest, desire, action. Okay, those templates sit within Jarvis, and so you can say to the AI, right now, I would like you to write. You can give it a command. This is in the latest iteration of Jarvis, which is called boss mode. They've now implemented a function which is called Jarvis command, and you can literally write or speak out, and you can actually say, write a paragraph using AIDA framework about whatever the topic is, right? And if you give it that command, it will then automatically go into its database, and it will spit out the paragraphs in that framework, right? It's so powerful. Like, man, I'm still blown away. And then that's really great. And then you go into, okay, if you want to now, assuming we're integrating with Surfer, and Jarvis does have a direct integration into Surfer, then you can say, well, Surfer is telling me I need to write, these should be my H2s, right? So these should be my headings. Therefore, I'm going to flag that as a H2 in Jarvis. There's a way you can do that. And then say, Jarvis, I want you to write about that heading. And then it will expand and write paragraphs about that heading, right? And then you can say, if you wanted to list out bullet points, you can also teach it to do formatting for you. So you can say, list the top 10 reasons why you shouldn't use AI, or the top 10 reasons why you should use AI, and then it would then generate a list for you. So now you're building. So I like to think of it as you're building the paragraphs, each paragraph at a time, or each section at a time, and then you get to if you're using Surfer, you will know what your target word count needs to be. So then you could aim to get to that word count. If you're not, that's fine. So once you've got all that, you get to the bottom, and then what you want to close off the article is a nice conclusion. So then you would say, Jarvis or Copy AI, write the conclusion for this article, and it basically reads the whole article, and then it summarizes it and puts it into a nice conclusion for you, and then you've got your draft, right? So that's kind of the quick 2-minute rundown on how I do the workflow. But then from there, once we have a draft, now I'm gone to manual mode. Before I go to manual mode, I output to Google Docs. I then run Grammarly Pro on it. So then that does all the grammar checks, and it does all the phrase recognition, and it's recommending different phrases for different things that the AI didn't do too well. And then now we're going to what is still a very manual process, which is adding context. So you might add stories. So you might have stories. I'm talking about a specific client, or I'm talking about a specific experience that I had when I was over in Bali, and you're writing an article about travel, and and the tool cannot pull from your brain. It doesn't have the recollection, the 40 years of knowledge you've stored in your own database. Right. This is where two common questions come up around using AI. One is plagiarism, which you've touched upon, and is it stealing other people's blogs, and is it doing that, right? So anything you produce from AI, you want to run through a tool like Copyscape or Grammarly Pro. I prefer Copyscape. I think the quality check is better, like the result of it. The second one is around how do I make it unique, because 2 articles on the web on what are the top SEO tools right now, right? Most likely is going to have the same tools. Most likely going to be the same sentiment. What's going to make it different is when you, as the expert or the person who's the practitioner, where you come in and go, well, I use this tool to generate this, outcome for this particular client, and so that's a story that Jarvis doesn't have,
Yeah.
right? The tool doesn't have that, and so that's where you can come in and really add to it, and that's where the power is in having the human involved.
Awesome. Awesome. I appreciate this. Yeah, we will definitely, if you send over the YouTube video, we're going to definitely embed this. Anybody who wants to then see this or read an article about this AI topic, really, we are going to have this on seoleverage.com/podcast under episode 39. I want to thank you for your time. Anfernee, is always a pleasure to get to know like the latest insights about content. We learned a lot in content strategy. Definitely head over to this episode 8 and listen to this and get some more background about Anfernee's history and experience in this field. And definitely, I think it's just worth playing around with this a little bit, right? It's definitely, and you explained the steps now so kindly, it's definitely not a press a button, get your article, have your problem solved approach. And I think it's never going to be, because the more people are going to be using AI, exactly what you mentioned is happening, it's going to be very similar. It's going to be very similar. There's going to be very similar content out there. I would expect, now we have a service that puts articles together. I would expect soon a service that puts an entire website together where you say, look, I want to create a website that contains 50 articles about SEO and copywriting, and do this now, put this up, give it a nice blue design with 2 columns and a header, and create a logo. We are not that far away from that. We have GPT-3, as you mentioned, as a technology already putting together websites based on verbal instructions. So you say, you tell it, make this left column bigger and make this header smaller and make sure this on the right-hand side, this scrolls, etc. The tools are out there. I think we're probably maybe a year or 2 away from a service that creates websites on the press of a button, where you can really focus on more on design and rewording probably than anything else. AI is coming, AI is here. We need to see how we can leverage it as much as possible, but we cannot forget to give content our own voice. We cannot forget to tie in our own stories. Storytelling is bigger than ever. These days, we know exactly that stories make sure that information really sticks with people. And neutral, let's call it cold AI written text, is just not going to work in the same way. So the blended approach you say, where AI is the assistant, is definitely interesting. The tools you mentioned, we might have talked about Jarvis AI, we talked about InLink, Surfer SEO, Grammarly Pro, Edit Hemingway, etc. We're going to link to all those tools in the show notes as well in the article, because I think it's interesting to play around with this. And if you have someone writing your content or you write your own content, definitely give this a try. Jarvis AI. We're not sponsored by this show. We might need to reach out to them afterwards. But definitely, they are one of the leaders in this field. We can't ignore this. They're doing a really good job. And just having AI injection in your writing process at different stages of this entire process definitely is making sense. My team and I are doing this on a regular basis, trying to see where this fits in. This is really a work in progress. We're not there yet where we kick out all the junior writers, and we don't plan to. We try to upskill them, as you said, make them more aware of certain SEO parts of it, make them more aware of conversion parts. How does copy really then introduce a possible call to action? All those things are definitely important. Thank you so much, Anfernee, for your time, for the information you shared here, and I hope we can have you back on the show soon.
Absolutely. I think this is a really powerful conversation. And as the tools evolve, I'm sure we'll have more to talk about. And I like your vision, and I agree. I think in the next 2 to 3 years, there will be a time where we can say, click a button and create a website for us. And what I see that forcing us to do, Gert, really is it unlocks the creativity, and we have, as humans, can now focus on the user experience and focus on doing the things that the technology can't do. It can still not take sales calls for us, for example. We still need to speak to our customers. We still need to build relationships, right? And it allows us to focus on those important things.
I do hope AI is never going to speak to my customers, because this is the best part of my job, really. Final question. If someone wants to know more about you, work with you, where can they go in order to get in touch?
I think the best thing you can go to is my website, which is simplecreativemarketing.com. I have also created a Jarvis resources page there where I'm updating it with constant trainings and references and commands and things like that as I'm learning them. So I'll share that with you as well. But if you head over to my website, you can grab it there.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Gert.